I was on my way to my first or second week at sixth form college, which is Kingsway, Princeton. I just finished school, and I was on the Hammersmith and City line to college.
Yeah.
And there was this guy on the train, kept staring at me, bald guy, I think I was about 16, yeah, I wasn't 17. This guy kept staring at me and I was like, this is really strange. So we went from Hammersmith to Labrador, and then we got to Baker Street. The guy got off and he gave me a card and he said he was a stylist called Simon Foxton, and he worked with Nick Knight, and he worked for a magazine called ID and Arena, and would I model for him? So I was like, okay. Went home, my mother said, no, this fashion industry full of strange people.
Stay away from it.
Strange people.
You should have listened to your mother, Edward.
I should have, right? And I remember pestering. Eventually, I don't know if she called Simon or Simon called him, but I remember coming to Richmond, to be picked up by Charlotte for some shoot at your house. And we drove up to Nick's house, and that's where I met the great Nick Knight. I was so nervous, so shy, yeah.
My first memories of Edward is a very handsome, very beautiful young man in my photographs. So that's my first memory of you, and that's how we first met. But to be honest,
at your house, Richmond.
Yeah, it was probably probably a shoot for ID magazine.
I think it was for ID, yeah.
Yeah, probably most of the stuff we were doing was time with ID.
I just remember being so nervous and having the beautiful house with a garden. It left an impression on me, actually.
Good.
To this day. I remember when I was working for Nick, I was still at college, and my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. And I thought I'd be a lawyer, but I was so fascinated by this world and fascinated by Simon. So I was going to school and started kind of assisting Simon. I remember Nick introduced me to ID. I think, I was around 17 then, because I started at 18. He introduced me to Terry and Trisha Jones.
Yeah.
So I went up to ID and I started doing some work for ID, for Terry, Beth, the gang. And when Beth left, I took over.
ID only used to come out once every 3 months when it first started.
In the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was quite an easy magazine to work for in that way, and literally just encouraged you to photograph people you're interested in. Yeah. So, and then Simon and I met through ID. Simon was just graduated when I think I met Simon.
Yes, the design, St. Martin's.
Yeah, and then really, I mean, ID sort of changed a little bit. You know, it started off in the beginning of the 80s. I think by the end of the 80s, it had kind of lost its way a little bit. It was trying to find its own place. I mean, youth trends sort of change, and therefore magazines which are very youth-orientated have to kind of realign themselves every so often with what's going on. And I think the first version of ID had happened and kind of got a bit quieter, and then you came in and brought new life to it.
Like a 90s.
So in the 90s, there was a big sort of, you had a big moment there.
But it was a group of friends, sort of like David, Craig, and Corin.
Yeah.
But you were the picture editor, so you kind of brought
all
of us in.
Yeah, Terry asked me to find some people to be the photographers for ID. So I was a sort of commissioning picture editor, consulting commissioning picture editor, which meant it was a bit tricky. If you're given a job, then you can do it. If you're a consultant, you just have to advise, so you can be ignored, which is a little tricky. But yeah, so it was all the young photographers who were young in those days, who were Craig McDean, who was my assistant, and Dave Sims, Jürgen Teller, Corinne Day, Glenn Lutchford. Could all have become the sort of photography establishment, sort of quite quickly. Yeah, Mario Sorrenti. Yeah. By sort of 10 years later, they were all the sort of the mainstay of fashion throughout the sort of from 2000 onwards. Yeah. And ID very much when I got involved in the beginning of the 90s was was a real sort of interesting magazine. It wasn't a mainstream magazine. It was still quite underground. It was very open to different ideas. Terry's great thing at ID was always being open to kind of new ideas. He was never sort of moralistic, never sort of censoring. There's a few areas he wouldn't go to, but most of the time he's pretty broad-minded what he'd accept. So we could all commission our friends to do things that we thought were exciting. So in many ways it was a very broad-minded magazine. And I think the magazine world needed that.
Yeah, at that time I remember. I mean, half of us wouldn't have been able to exist.
No, without the alternative press.
ID,
no. Well, without sort of the IDs, the Days, the Face, all those sort of magazines which have grown up since and come and gone. Some of them like the Face. You know, they provided a counterculture to the more mainstream magazines like the Vogues and the, you know, Marie Claire's or whatever it was, who were quite narrow-minded in what they'd accept. So luckily for a whole generation of image makers and for stylists and models, came from there. So, you know, Kate Moss, for instance, came through Corinne, you know, shoots on For the Face and for ID. You know, Jürgen Teller, and all those people came through. Yeah. So I think ID had a very important place, and you know, for you personally, had a very important place because you were given responsibility. It was a huge responsibility. But
I think it was fun because at that time I never really even looked at Vogue. You never did. I didn't look at. To be honest, I didn't even know what was going on across the pond in New York in the beginning. Later we did. Yeah. But it was so London-centric, like you said, having fun with your friends. Yeah. Like, oh, let's go shoot something. And then Terry would always sort of be so encouraging. And you learn by your mistakes. I don't know if people have that luxury so much these days. So, you know, you learn from, oh my God, whether it was the light or whether it was, you learn from making mistakes, and that's how you got better, I think.
I think, we still learn from making our mistakes. You were given a lot of responsibility at a young age.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking back now, it's kind of like, whoa, that was a lot. But I was sort of 18, very shy, and having to commission. I used to love writing. Yeah. I have, you know, writing, commission, styling, dealing with photographers. But it just felt like, hey, let's just do it. You know, I felt really comfortable. Yeah. I felt really comfortable. I mean, there were lots of sleepless nights and, you know, whatever work, being scared, having to act grown up was one thing I always remember, having to act like I was older than I was. Right. But, you know, hey, we learn and we you just do it really, don't you?
I would have thought of one more recent one is the one with Carly Kloss. It was photographed in the couture, the Paris couture shows, and I spent a week beforehand going to the Paris couture shows with you, and then a week afterwards photographing this incredibly beautiful Carly Kloss in creations made by...
What's a baby then, I thought?
So she was young then,
yeah. She was young.
Sam and Val did hair and makeup. Yeah. Incredible visions that were put in front of me. As an image maker, working, you know, with yourself and Val and Sam and, you know, and Carly, you know, it's like being given this incredible vision that you know, that you couldn't dream up really. So it makes my job so much easier because all I'm looking at then is something that's just absolutely pouring for out images and visions and kind of, you know, just showing things you've never seen. Because, you know, Sam made a wig that was kind of, you know, so big on top of her head, and you know, she just
but like, you know, I remember calling Sam and Val, and we're like, oh my God, it's Nick. It has to be incredible. You know, and the fact that you were there for a whole week just made things so much better. We were able to talk about clothes we loved, and you know, you showed me illustrations of the girl Kukula that is a Kukula stuck in my mind.
There was two or three people we were referencing. One was Kukula, who's an illustrator who works actually now the stuff at SHOWstudio. Another one was a chap called Ray Caesar.
Ray Caesar,
Mark Ryden. There's a whole genre of that sort of. I guess you could call it kind of modern Gothic or something like that. It's where things like American Gothic have come from. Yeah, it is a weird sort of vision of childhood and then brought through to adult references. So sort of nursery rhyme type imagery, but then brought up to kind of, you know, an adult version of that, and then a surrealistic adult version of that, and quite a dark.
It was very dark.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting shoot.
Yeah.
And
I
also,
loved it. You know, and then you painted it.
No, mostly it was done in camera. There was a little bit of backgrounds were dropped in, those sorts of things. But most of it is done in camera. People often think I do more sort of afterwards than I do, but it's just a question of knowing what you're doing when you start.
That's what I love about Nick. You know what I mean? You always want to see how far you can push an image in its most perfect form, I always think. Yeah. And I think a lot of people kind of don't have that these days.
But it was a great shoot, and part of it's why I particularly remember it was because of how incredibly generous you were beforehand, and incredibly good at making me feel at ease, going through all the couture houses and meeting with Karl Lagerfeld, then going to Dior, and going all the circuit that you're so used to. And part of part of the reason I think you've been such a huge success is because you're so good with people. When you took me around the couture shows, you made me feel incredibly cherished and welcome and informed, and it was just like a very, very nice time spent with somebody.
I mean, I feel like we're in this industry where, you know, it's surviving is difficult. You know, producing new work is difficult. Staying at a certain level or whatever is difficult. That for me, it's really important to have sort of genuine relationships with people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just to have that. I can't exist in a world where I'm sort of always tense or always, I don't know, not relaxed or conniving to get, I don't know. It all gets kind of a bit
I think maybe that's because you came from a, your own family, but also then your professional family, your work family, Terry and Trish, who probably, in their role model of making a magazine, made a magazine that was very loving to its
like
contributors.
A family,
which is Terry and Trish have always said that about ID. I think that's something that you've probably taken with you.
You don't realise, but you do.
When you crossed the pond, when you went to America, I should imagine you took quite a lot of that there.
Yeah, so
and not everybody has that.
Family around. And
I think there's a difference between a magazine that is there, primarily for profit, and a magazine like ID, which is there, sadly for ID, not for profit, but for sort of making an important cultural contribution to fashion, to the world. I think that Terry really wanted that. Terry was never somebody who was seeking money above everything else.
Never.
He was trying to do projects that made him excited, and he felt there was some sort of, I guess, a humane point to it. I think there's an incredibly inextricable link between fashion and music. It's always the music you hear on the catwalks, the music we play in the studios. There seems to be something. I mean, clothes are always been. We've had a career both of sort of making incredible images of clothes, but a lot of clothes are seen in movement. And I think it's really important when we work with the models. They all often need a particular soundtrack to make them work in a particular way. I remember working with Giselle once for a Dior campaign, which went on for 5 days, and we listened to Mary Jane Blige, the same track, for 5 days on repeat. But she needed it. She needed to hit the thing, and it's how they move. It's incredibly important. I mean, there's some photographers that work.
It brings an emotional side to fashion, doesn't it? Like an emotional layer.
When I was working in the sort of 90s and early 2000s, I'd make my own mixtapes to listen to. And there'd be only 30 seconds of any track. So it would change after 30 seconds, which would drive people, other than me, bananas.
All day.
But it took me ages to make some. But what I liked is that it's a change, a change of pace. So it was the opposite of the Giselle factor. It was the opposite of Mary J. Blige for 5 days. It was however good Mary J. Blige is, and she's very good. But it was the idea that you had a different mood every 30 seconds, so the girls would find different moods within that. And also,
so, I think about your work like that. It's always ever evolving, and that kind of makes sense to me. You never stand still. You always want to push things. You always want to show new things. So I can imagine why the 30 seconds.
30 seconds was a good way of doing it.
I tend not to play music on set, but what I will do is play music in the back, in the dressing room. Just to get the mood, almost like get the character. And then when I leave, I pretty much leave the music to sort of you or whoever's in charge. And it's very nice for me to kind of see the clothes or the girl. I mean,
it's also when the model insists on having her own music or the music she wants, and it's not my taste. Sometimes just by the fact that you try and understand her world by seeing her more of with her environment, if you want. So the music becomes part of that. So most times the music sort of I find music I like even within the tastes that I don't normally go to. Just because I can see the model really enjoying working with it.
Well, I talk a lot on shoots, as you know.
You do?
From Charlotte. It's very important sort of communication on shoots for me. There are moments where you go quiet, but it's the energy. I sort of feed off the energy of a shoot. Like when it's going really well, and when you're in your moment and the girl's in the moment, and it's so exciting. It's like a drug almost. I always have this. I still have this feeling in my stomach. Sort of half excitement, half dread. At the beginning of every shoot, it's like, okay, it's almost like giving birth every time. I mean, I don't know that I know, but to get to that state of almost, it's almost like euphoria, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly a state
it takes a lot.
Yeah, it does take a lot. You don't always get there.
No.
Sometimes shoots can be good, but you don't get to that state.
There.
No, but when you do get there, it just feels very very special.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to explain that to anybody who hasn't done it.
You have to be involved in the process.
And people always say to me, "What? You're scared before a shoot?" I think, "Yeah, I'm terrified before a shoot."
Nervous.
Yeah, because you don't know how you're going to do it, and you have your Lara Stone or Anna Ewers or Maria Carla, these incredibly beautiful women in front of you. You think, I'm not capable of making this incredibly beautiful woman look even vaguely beautiful, you know? So there's a sort of feeling of failure straight away. But I think that's important. I think
it's very important because it pushes you to do something you haven't done before, or push you out of your comfort zone.